Welcome to episode number 21 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast, the show where we talk about wellness, mental health, leadership, and what it takes to have a wellness culture within your organization. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I hope you're doing well and taking care of yourself. Cassie Sexton spent a number of years as a first responder, first as a police officer in her Southern California community, and finally as a 911 dispatcher. But the job took a toll on her life, as it does for many first responders. Today, Cassie is an account executive with Mindbase, where her primary focus revolves around proactive wellness initiatives and resource provision for first responders through technology. She continues to actively contribute to the regional peer support team and holds a position on the APCO International Health and Wellness Committee. Stay tuned for her compelling story as she shares a few of the things she did to get her health and wellness back to what it should be. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. I know there are a ton of podcasts out there, and so I really appreciate that you take time to listen to this one. I'm also grateful for everyone who's joining us on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to hit the subscribe button no matter what channel you watch or listen from. This really helps us get the word out to more people about the show. And please take a few minutes to rate and review the show. This really would mean the world to me and helps us rise up in the rankings. Thanks again for listening and watching. And now, here's my conversation with Cassie Sexton. Well, Cassie, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, it's been great getting to know you, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more about what you guys do, and also excited to hear about your story. And you come from the 911 world, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So, what is your story? When did you start in the 911 industry or profession?
So actually, before 911, I started as a parking officer. I was a small beach city here in Southern California. I was young, 19. One of my friends from high school was already working in the industry. I had a couple friends actually who did. And I, just like a lot of people do to us, when we were in the career, they're like, oh my gosh, your job's so exciting. Tell me more about it. Tell me your day. And I think they got tired of that because the enthusiasm wears off at some point. And they're like, back then of paper applications, like, here we're hiring, you just apply. And I was like, what, me? Like, I was going to school to be a teacher at the time. I was a dance teacher while I was going to school. I worked at the grocery store. Like, I was very much like law enforcement wasn't even on my radar. Mm-hmm. Like, I tell people my story when I'm teaching sessions that, I grew up in a grocery store family, and my dream was to work at the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And at 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, I was walking around with a remote control, scanning anything with a barcode. Like, I would set up my little Barbie shop and dolls and be like, okay, next, what are you buying today? And like, that was my dream. And I did it. At 15 and a half, I went down to our local grocery store, put in my application in my suit. And I'm like, I'm here to work at the grocery store. And I was excited about it. Like, I was a legacy grocery store worker. And I did it and I loved it, and I would have stayed, but it just wasn't the industry it was when my family was growing up in it. But I fell into the law enforcement industry, as I call it, because I did not know what I signed up for. I got out there and I'm young and excited, and I'm writing people parking tickets with a smile on my face, sunny and 75. And they're like, listen, little girl, like, you just ruined my day. And I realized really fast that I had to change me and my attitude and everything about it. And so I did. I started in parking, and then I worked in the jail, and I went to an academy, and I toughened up and became badass, as I would call it, and got excited about all the tactical stuff, or tactical, as I called it. And I was, next thing you know, like, the things in my house started changing from girly and sparkly, which I still have sparkly things everywhere, but started shifting from that to more tactical and fun copy stuff, and like very much different life. And my friends would start to shift as well at this point. Normal friends started going to the side, and then cop friends and dispatcher friends and law enforcement friends started coming in, because I was working nights, weekends, holidays, 24/7. I was the closest call me. And I would start experiencing trauma. And people, I was actually thinking about this today and yesterday. I was kind of sitting and thinking about kind of those changes and shifts. And as I was thinking about getting on this podcast with you, I was kind of thinking about those experiences and first times and the first dead body and the first calls and the first things that like really started to impact me. And the things that I thought at the time were those check boxes, the things that I wanted and needed for my career, which were. And I'll never forget the first dead body scene I went to. And I remember seeing it and going, I feel like I'm in a wax museum. Like they don't even seem real to me. And I went right back up and ate my lunch. And at the time I was like, check, I'm right for this career. And
Were you aware of those changes that were going on in you?
not then. So no, I remember hearing them tell us, you're going to change. I read the book, right? Survival and Law Enforcement, like what's going to happen to you. And I thought to myself, I'll be fine. And then, joke's on me, right? And I got that transition from the jail into dispatch happened. And while I was in the jail, our small beach city would have still the largest mass shooting to this day in Orange County. And we've had a couple other shootings, but not quite one as impactful as that. And I would watch a couple cops and a couple dispatchers go out on stress leave, which in our community that had never happened here. And the dispatchers would end up retiring out. And I then came into dispatch. And I remember asking my trainer at the time, when should I expect that to happen to me? And this has nothing to do with him or them or anything, like any of the people that trained me. Or I remember everyone around me saying like, that's never going to happen to you. Don't worry. Like you're different. That's not usual. And it's not usual.
But it was something in the back of your mind that you knew this was going to happen.
And I was thinking in my head, like, I think I was preparing because I was wondering, does this happen to people? Is this normal? Should I be worried? What can I do to prepare? And then hearing that it's not normal, I was like, I'm fine, right? And to preface this, like I grew up in a family that didn't talk about emotions. You're either angry or you're okay, and you shove everything under the rug. And so when I got into law enforcement and nobody talked about emotions and everything, and you're okay or angry, and you go out and you kick ass and you catch bad guys, I was like, this is perfect for me because I love this. And you're passionate and you chase, helping people, service. And like, I was very service minded, and this was the right field for me. And so I got in and I did all the things, and I did all the things right, according to the book. And I was chasing the promotions, chasing the next agency, chasing the next admin project. When we talk about coping skills, I would socially drink. I definitely got in at 20, like that 21 realm, and started drinking with all the cops and all my friends and socially, and made bad choices and partied and whatever. But that was not my coping skill, I wouldn't say. Mine was work. Endless overtime, endless projects, wanting to promote. I mean, everyone knew at a young age that I made it very clear that I would go to the top. It was well known. Mine was sleeping pills, because then it started to be what I know now about mental health, right? Versus what I knew then. I didn't know then that I was using it as a coping skill, but all that adrenaline and all that work and excitement and things that I was chasing, I would come home and not be able to unwind. I couldn't turn it off. I had 80 tabs open in my brain. So instead, to balance it out, because I didn't have a healthy coping skill, I would drown it with pills or shopping, sex, sometimes alcohol if I did it socially. Like if I did drink, I also was doing all the other things. So everything kind of overlapped and played into each other. And it wouldn't be till later. I was working here in California, at least you can work at multiple agencies at a time. And I did. And I was working 80 hours a week at sometimes. And the pros of my life was I bought a condo here in Southern California at 24 years old on my own. Like I lived a very on the surface perfect life. Everyone looked at me and goes, what do you have anything to be sad about. Like, you look like you're living the dream. And I was.
Was all the work and activity trying to, was it, looking back now, were you trying to kind of silence the noise in your head?
Definitely. There was a point during all that, I thought I was doing all this to feel things. And then really I was doing things to numb things. Once I really learned about what I was doing, I thought I was chasing the high, but I wasn't. I was doing it to numb the feelings. It was the reverse. Once I really understood what I was doing and why, I would have thought that I was chasing the adrenaline. Like I was like, oh, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I'm like, definitely not. I am trying to numb all the feelings and emotions. I just didn't know I was feeling anything. And so I got to a breaking point about 10 years in when I had already lost a couple people in my life, in my career, friends, family. I had experienced my own sexual trauma as an adult. I had one as a child too at 6 years old. So I had trauma coming into this career that I did not deal with. And then I got into it and it just piles, right? Piles. Don't deal with it. And then it eventually is going to come out. And I like to remind people of that because you can only push things down for so long. And then I would lose a captain and a friend to suicide. And then a couple months later, another officer friend who lived or worked at our neighboring agency. We dispatched for 3 agencies in one. So they both worked at agencies that we dispatched for. Their lives were celebrated very differently. One not celebrated, one celebrated, which should have been the one that died in an accident. He is a hero, but I could not cope with that because the person that died of suicide was my friend. And I was heartbroken and angry. And also at the time of his death, I was already thinking about suicide. And so I was upset because I was like, well, he beat me to it. And then that spiraled me further. And so that's when I finally reached out for help. I was like, I got to talk to someone because I'm hurting. And I did. And I didn't tell anyone about it. I started talking to a therapist and I was very type A about it. And I'm like, hey, I'm here to talk to you, but I'm only going to talk about these couple of things. I'm not going to open up anything about my family or about my personal life. I just want to talk about work. And she kind of laughed, but she said, okay. And then next thing you know, we're talking about personal stuff and family. And then my life unraveled and I fell apart a little at a time. And the only thing holding me together was work. And I showed up still every day. And
did others in your agency know that things were going on?
No. So they said no, at least. Like when I left, so I would do this for about almost a solid year, probably about 9 months before things really fell apart. I would end up going on some medication, and that is what really unraveled me. And eventually my anxiety from all that and the medication made me just unravel completely. And I rose the white flag and said, I'm out. And I went on leave. At that point, everyone was like in shock and they're like, what's happening? Because I have never experienced anything like that before. And that's when everyone was surprised. And when I came back, everyone's response to me was, we had no idea anything was wrong with you. So to me, the lesson in it was that some people can seem totally fine on the surface and they're not.
They can hide it.
Yeah. And so I didn't think I was covering it that well, but apparently I was. And that to me was scary because I was dying inside. And I would come home and isolate. I mean, my parents and my family knew something was wrong. And I ended up towards the end of those 3 to 6 months, I was still working. I was living at my family's house. I had an empty, brand new condo sitting empty that I was remodeling. And I was living at my childhood home because I wasn't safe. And my closest best friends, I finally had to admit to them what was going on. And they were like, we knew something was wrong, but we didn't know it was that bad. And then eventually it was bad. And I was on leave. And once I lost my purpose, then it got worse. And the storm got worse before it got better. And I was getting help, but not fast enough. And us first responders, if it's not done our way, then it's not fast enough or good enough. And so holidays come, and holidays are even worse for me than regular time. And there was something about not being at work. There's something I always say. It's like I felt some kind of tremendous guilt and pressure about not being in the seat answering 911. And I was like, I don't know why I felt that, because I know that when I leave, I would take my headset off and hand the clicker to somebody else. And I know someone sits there when I'm not there, because it's a 24-hour business. Someone's got to be there. And I know someone pushes a black and white, and I know someone handles fire. Like, we're all there. But for some reason, if I'm not there, someone's not answering and someone's not telling the cops where to go. And so I felt some kind of guilt about not being there, that if I'm not there, no one is. And so the self-talk started, and I'm not enough and I'm not doing enough. Ruger, my guest appearance, he's like, what's going on here? And so I kind of got into this spiral where it just continued to eat at me, and there was nothing anyone could have done. And I like to emphasize that for people, because people had afterwards told me, like, or asked, really, was there anything I could have said or done? Did I not do enough? And I was like, no, I wouldn't have heard you. I was so far gone because I had convinced myself I wasn't enough, I wasn't good enough, and I don't deserve to be here. And honestly, so I got to the point that I tried to complete suicide, and I was standing in my parents' kitchen, and I was convinced that I was done. And I sliced my arm open. And I'm so glad that I didn't, because I live a very different life now. And I'm 5 years out, and the people's lives that I touched now, and also my own life, I am so grateful for. And I chose to get help, and I stopped actually because my dogs, and I was at my parents' house, but my dogs and their dogs woke up because it was in the middle of the night, and they came out, and my dad woke up, and I stopped, and I went back to my room before he saw me. But if they hadn't have woken up, I would have finished. And so, call it divine intervention or whatever, but they knocked me out of the cycle at that moment. And I thought to myself, what am I doing? I don't actually want to do this. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And I do want help, and I do want to live. I just feel really shitty right now. And this is a temporary solution, or a permanent solution to a temporary problem. What was your question?
What was that process for you then to get help from there?
So I checked myself into treatment for 30 days, but that wasn't it. It was a very long road from there. So I went to treatment for 30 days where I stayed somewhere else away from home. And when I went, I was still in my head, and I was still committed. Even though I had said that I didn't want to die, I was still committed to the process, where I was like, I'm here to get help. And if this is my last effort. So if this doesn't work, I'm done. So you guys have to fix me. And when I say that, I put the most work in, and I did the work myself, but I was like, this has to work or else I'm done. And so in those 30 days, worked the hardest in my entire life I ever have. And I also, for the first time in I don't even know how long, felt feelings and expressed feelings and felt safe finally. And then was also scared to go home because I finally felt safe. And I remember on the last day crying and feeling very emotional because I had said, can I just stay here? I'm like, it's not the most comfortable bed I've ever slept in, but I actually feel safe. And so it was really hard for me to walk away. And I took out my invisible suicide card and left it on the table. And I told them, I'm leaving this here with you because it's not an option anymore. And it hasn't been. I mean, there's been some really shitty days, but it hasn't been like that. And so I walked out and I put in another 10 weeks at my local hospital here doing intensive outpatient. And so 14 weeks altogether in treatment care. And then after that, another 3 years of support groups. And I just went to one again on Tuesday night. Like, I don't go to support groups regularly anymore, but I check in when I need it and when I have a shitty week. And I do go to therapy regularly. Every 3 weeks, I check in with my therapist, which is an odd number, but that's my favorite number and it's safe. So I go. And then I still do quarterly visits with my psychiatrist. I meditate every day. I am a big believer in that. But my point in all of that is recovery is not a go one time check in and check out and you're safe. It is an everyday routine that keeps me healthy and
you have
strong.
to choose to do that, right?
Absolutely. And I actually just, I am on a group on Facebook that is some of my friends in recovery and therapists and case managers and stuff, people and podcast friends and people who are passionate about recovery. And they had written something about getting through the holidays a couple weeks ago. And I had posted on it about building your ship before the storm and making sure that you're ready for seasons like this or just life in general, but with recovery. And they had written something else this week and then tagged me in it to comment on it. And it is relevant because I said I had a really tough week, and the whole reason I build this ship before the storm so that I'm not paddling in the storm water, filling my boat up with water, that it's ready for when the storm comes, is because of weeks like this where I felt really like I was struggling and flailing. Was that when I didn't feel good, I picked up the phone and called and said, hey, are you still running a support group on Tuesday nights? Because I really need some support. And I showed up, and the guys that were in there were brothers that I went through recovery with. And so when I got there, it was safe and felt familiar.
During
And they listened and helped.
that first 30 days when you were in treatment, what did you learn about yourself during that time that helped you to get to where you are now?
Oh, so much. One, that I'm not alone, because I felt like I was on an island. And so I went to Gen Pop treatment, first of all, as I call it, because I didn't know that there were first responder resources out there. And that's a whole nother layer to this, which is something I found out after my 14 weeks of treatment. But even then, I was in treatment with a bunch of people who were not first responders. I had one firefighter that I became really good friends with. But other than that, I sat there in a room full of other people that were going through the same things I was, whether it was addiction, mental health, or whatever. And I was able to bond very quickly with them. The first 72 hours I was on, not a hold, but I was sitting there going, what did I do and why am I here? And I was crying and very anxious and scared. But after I got through that tough period, and then I was able to open up to other people and share what I was going through, I realized I heard a lot of Me Too's and people who had been there, are going through it, or shared their stories. There's people that I still talk to from there 5 years later, and that I bonded with, and that I realized that I thought for so long I was on this island and I couldn't share how I felt. And that I was scared to, and that I was the only human being, which is so not true, that had ever felt suicidal or that wanted to die or that didn't feel, which really the root of that is that I wasn't feeling enough. And that is so not true. There's so many other people on this planet who feel that every single day. And then the other part of that was that I have emotions and that it's healthy to feel them.
What are some of the things that you learned there, that you started doing that you weren't doing before, that got you where you are?
So some of the major things are some coping skills. And I love teaching and sharing this with other people, first responders or not, but mostly I teach first responders. And they were things that I took away that were tangible. And some of them were some of the coping skills I do that I still do every single day, which were like grounding. And like, I get really anxious still when I'm in crowds, and I'm in Southern California. I'm a big Disneyland fan, which I laugh because one of my besties, Ryan, that you know, Deadman, he hates Disneyland, but I'll go still regularly. But when it gets really crowded, I get anxious. And so I'll find myself kind of looking around and start grounding techniques, everything from naming categories of different like dog breeds or ice cream flavors or car models or whatnot, something to jog my brain to get it shifting into different things. Because if your brain's focusing on something, it can't focus on what you're anxious about or stressing about. Or I'll look at different shapes and slowly go through them and start finding shapes in the room or colors. My parents know I do this, so that they'll say, when we see you zoning out, we know that you're grounding. They know that I'm anxious. So my mom will be like, are you okay? And I'm like, yes, I'm grounding. Or I'll start touching or feeling something. I almost always have a challenge coin in my pocket or a crystal or a rock or something so that I can hold it and like kind of bring myself back down to center. I used to be very big. I had a lot of nightmares at first, a lot through treatment, because as your brain's processing through your trauma, a lot of your old trauma starts coming up. And so I would do a lot of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of grounding, where it's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can smell. Like there's different variations of that, but so you're engaging all of your senses. And I would modify that, but I always keep a one of those insulated tumblers, the metal ones, by your bed with ice water in it, because when I would wake up from a nightmare, I would grab a cold drink and it would like remind me that I'm here and that that's not real.
So what did your friends and the people you were associated with, especially at work, what was their response to you going through this?
So just like I was thinking I was the only one on the planet that went through this, when I came back to work, I was very scared. One, I wasn't sure if I could still do the job because I was afraid that I had changed so much. But I also was afraid that when I came back, people would think that I wasn't safe to do this job, or I wasn't sure what they would think.
You were
And then I was
dispatching at the
worried.
time?
Yeah, I was worried about if I was just worried about the judgments, because we can be a very judgy bunch. And so I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I came back, because when I left, they knew I was on stress leave, but they didn't know why. And no one knew what happened. I hadn't told anyone but my closest 2 friends that it was a suicide attempt. And so when I came back, I wasn't very encouraged the first day back. And so I kind of inside had that moment where I had to choose to ground and fight through, or it was one of those moments in my head where I was like, do I just turn my badge in now? And so I chose to stay. And I'm glad I did, because I went back and plugged back in. And as I did, some of my favorite officers and dispatchers, I mean, me staying ended up creating one of my best dispatch friend relationships that was unexpected. She was a newer dispatcher at our agency and was training right around the time that I started going through my mental health time, and then on leave. So when I came back, she was like a newer dispatcher. And so because I came back, her and I became very close. We were working the same shifts, and now she's one of my best friends. And I've really bonded with her. And so if I wouldn't have stayed, I wouldn't have gotten to know her. The other thing, and we ended up on peer support together. A lot of the officers that I was close with came in and they're like, we're so glad you're back. Tell us what happened. And then as I did, I heard them say, me too, or I have a brother, or I have a cousin or a friend or an aunt or whoever. There was a lot of people who had this experience that I didn't know about because no one talks about it.
What's something
There
that you
was,
wish you would have known before you went into the business of public safety?
yeah, so
Maybe it's part.
I think I wish, and I'm not sure if anything really could have prepared me for that. I didn't come from a legacy family. I actually kind of laughed a little bit as I got in and found out how many people I really did know who were in law enforcement. It was almost like it was a secret society, right? I realized how many friends, parents, or whoever, like, I just don't think we ever really talked about it growing up. Like, I didn't realize how many people actually were in this business. But I kind of looked around and was like, how do you guys cope with this job? How has anyone coped with it? And then I realized how many people don't cope with it. And I guess my thing is I wish that early on I would have known to process as I go, or to have a therapist
Mm-hmm.
ahead of time, or to not get rid of my normal friends, which they tell you that, but also like I wish I would have actually listened, because uh, to make it a priority,
Mm-hmm.
because the other thing is that work shouldn't be number one,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not, you're just a number,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
So
And
coming,
no matter if you work at a I worked at a small agency where it was a family agency,
mm-hmm.
and it was true. And so it almost gave me that uh, facade that all agencies are like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so I had that feeling where we are a family there. And then as I moved on to other agencies, that is not the case everywhere. And I really was a number.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my point is your seat's going to be filled when you're not there.
Mm-hmm. So looking at it from the outside, like I do, and not ever having been there in that position, thinking of friends and how your friends shift. How does that happen and why, when your friends become more of the people you work with and that kind of thing?
So what happens is, especially when you're new in law enforcement, you're working the weekend night shift and graves, and you work overtime because you're the baby
Mm.
and you're earning your bones. And so what happens is, for your normal friends and people, they're getting together on weekends and
And you're
holidays,
not
and
there.
you're working those.
Mm.
And so
Mhm.
if you really think about it, especially for these smaller agencies, you don't have a lot of turnover or a lot of people working. And so the chances are you're going to be stuck working weekend holidays nights for a long time, which was the case for me. I worked weekend holiday nights for a good 5-6 years, and then I lateraled. So I was another new baby at another agency.
Mhm.
So now it's 10 years. I worked weekend nights for 13 of my 14 years.
Mm. Wow.
And so that was also by choice, because I liked nights, because then I get into the habit of it, and I chose that.
Mhm.
Because as soon as I switched to day shift, I was like, no, no,
Mhm.
this is where the admin is. We don't like that. I must go back to the dark side. So like and then sometimes people are forced to that
Mhm.
shift. So my point is, like, you're stuck on a shift weekend nights, and that's where all the normal people hang out, or
Mhm.
weekend days or soccer games or whatever, and you start to miss.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you exactly what happens. If you miss one, it's fine. You miss two, it's okay. You start to miss three or four, and you say no enough times, you stop getting the
Mhm.
invites. And it's unfortunate, but true. And so you can say as many times as you want, I'm so sorry, it's work. But if you don't take the time off of work for it, then you're not going to be invited. And it's realistic that most of the time you have to pick and choose what's important to
Mhm.
you to take time off. And a 2-year-old's birthday probably isn't going to be that.
Mhm.
A wedding, yes, but like a birthday party, you can't take off for a weekend.
Right.
When you have a small agency, the overtime isn't going to be there for someone. You're not going to get approved for that.
Mhm.
So it becomes a whole situation on picking and choosing.
Mhm.
And then next thing you know, the 5 friends you had are now replaced with cops and firefighters or dispatchers, because they go out on Wednesday nights and that's the night you have
Mm.
off.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, all your travels and hangouts and everything, you hang out during the
Mhm.
week.
And all the habits that they bring to the table, you begin to assimilate that into your life and your lifestyle.
Yeah. And not always, I'm lucky that I was an only child in my family unit. So it's just the 3 of us. So like when I tell my parents I can't do Christmas on Christmas Day, and we do it on Boxing Day on the 26th every year, that was normal for us.
Mm.
But I'll tell you, at the moment I realized that I wasn't part of this family, of my extended family, is when I got into the private sector, and I showed up after being gone for 10 years, and my family goes, "Oh, you're here."
Mm.
And I go, "I'm still invited to these, aren't I? Like,
Mhm.
I'm still a part of this family." And they're like, "Well, you haven't been here in like 10 years."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Okay, then." Like, I mean, I have
Mhm.
hit and miss, but it's that moment when you realize how much this job has impacted
Mhm.
you. Now, I'm not everyone.
Mhm.
I have plenty of friends who make it to all their family stuff. I was the one that didn't.
Mhm. And that was your choice?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not always.
Right. Right.
There was early in the career, it's not,
Sure.
but later in the career, it
Mhm.
was, because it was already a habit.
Yeah. 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 I worked in a psychiatric hospital for 3.5 years, and so I worked every other weekend. And there's many of those 3 years that I worked there, I probably worked 2 Christmases, I think. So it was, you just did that. And so I can understand a little bit how that cycle happens, because someone had to be there. Someone had to, you know, take care of the kids that we had in our hospital. And so, and at the time I was single, and it's just what I did.
And that's kind of always been me. And my response to everyone in my family was I would rather have the families that have little kids be home with them at Christmas. And so I made excuses, but then it became a habit.
Mhm.
And I realized, like, why do I need to be there?
Mhm.
Like, I'm used to this.
Mhm.
And then now that I don't, it's almost weird.
Mhm. So what was that process for you to come from the public safety into the private sector?
I thought I was ready. So it was very easy for me at first because I kind of landed what I thought was the dream job into working in recovery for first responders. Because as soon as I got out of recovery and found out there were resources for first responders, I was screaming that from the rooftops, right? Because I called my HR while I was going through my stuff and I was on leave, and I'm like, I need to know what kind of treatment is available for first responders. And they're like, I don't know what you mean. Like, you guys are not special. You have the EAP. Here you go. And now they know there are resources for first responders specifically. But back then they didn't. And so I, after found out there were, and then have made it my business to make sure that there are like pages upon pages on pages of resources for first responders everywhere. And so I had partnered with our local resources and kind of was helping with peer support groups, and I was in the right setting to transition into working in recovery. And I started part-time and I stayed part-time with dispatch
Mhm.
for a while. So I kind of was already transitioning slowly. And then as I worked more hours in recovery, I worked less hours dispatching. So I was really hardly there.
Mhm.
I was like working one shift every other week. So
Mhm.
I was like, I'm ready to pull the plug. Got offered my full-time spot at recovery, working outreach. And I was like, this is the dream. I'm ready to pull the
Mhm.
plug. I went ahead and was like, here's my headset and my badge. Bye-bye.
Mhm.
And as soon as I turned it in, I had like a little bit of a mini identity
Mhm.
crisis again of grief.
Mhm.
It felt very similar to when I went on leave.
Mhm.
Not suicidal, but like a loss of identity of
Mhm.
like in purpose, where I was like, oh my God, like I thought I just went through this. Like I found out who I was. I reclassified myself. Like I was really into like what I was like, I was good. Like
Mhm.
what is happening right now? It was this huge loss of grief that I had to process
Mhm.
again. And it was hard. And then I processed it and then I was good.
Mhm.
And then I loved what I was doing. And then I um, moved into another position, into a more proactive form of wellness for first responders and helping peer support teams and agencies. And so I'm not working with the company that I switched to initially, but still in the private sector. And I can honestly say I don't miss dispatching at all. Um, it's not the job I miss, because when I was at the end, like right when I got back to work, I learned very quickly that I shouldn't be dispatching. And not that I couldn't do the job, it's that I didn't want to do the job
Mhm.
anymore, that I had changed too much. And it was that I really wanted to not help the public anymore, but help our people.
Mhm.
And then that's when I became very passionate about peer support. And so I realized that if I'm going to leave this career, I need to find something that helps me in that realm.
Mhm.
And so,
I was going to say, it sounds like, you still wanted to be a helper, because that's what first
yes,
responders do. They're the helpers. And so
yes,
you went into helping others that were dealing with
yes.
these issues, right?
Yeah, so I'm adjacent. That's why I'm like, I had to stay adjacent. Like, I could not give up the first responder realm.
Yeah.
I would be
Mhm.
heartbroken if I left. And so I found a way to stay. And man, do I. I feel more, I actually laughed about that when I got into the private sector. I'm more connected to first responders than I've ever been in my life. And I know more first responders now than I've ever known in my
Mhm.
life. And I'm happy and passionate, and my cup is full. And recovery is still an everyday thing,
Mhm.
but I'm passionate about what I do and it's fun.
Mhm.
And creative and lovely. And so
What's something that you do? Maybe it's part of a daily practice that you do that keeps you grounded. It keeps you, uh, healthy and well.
So I have kind of a routine. So I'm a big routine person, and that is what keeps me well. Like it has to be. I have to stay grounded that way. So I have a morning routine, and then I have a closing end of day routine. So morning is like I get up and I meditate before I do anything. Because I used to, when I first transitioned from 911 into private sector, I was very poor about this. Like I would lay in bed and scroll my emails for work, and I'm like, I would not, my hygiene for the day was gone
Mhm.
because I'm like already in work mode, and then I'm
Mhm.
like gotta go, and then I noticed I wasn't meditating or doing any of my morning routine, and I would be off to the races. And so I made it a long time routine of waking up, meditate, get up, start my coffee routine because I have like a little coffee bar, and this is like something that I really enjoy. So I start the coffee routine, and then I'll like start getting ready for the day. And then I log on to the computer and check all the things. And then because I work at home essentially most days unless I'm on the conference circuit, which can be its own beast.
That kind of screws
But
up
meditation still
your whole
happens.
system, doesn't it? Your whole routine. I know it does for
Yeah.
me. And
It does, but meditation still has to happen every
yeah.
day at the conference circuit, or I'll get derailed there too. And so then I do my work day, and if it's a rough day, I'll stop and meditate during lunch, or like during, like sometimes things have to be up ramped up. And then the end of day thing is like a lot of my friends know, like I'll take a bath every day because like water is like my
Mhm.
peacekeeper, like to wash the day off.
Mhm.
And so it's like hot bath, like I'll drink hot tea, like I have like certain things that ground me to.
Mhm.
And then I love watching like some of my, like I'm a big Friends fan, or Schitt's Creek, like
Mhm.
so I'll watch a funny show before bed to, like everyone's like, oh, are you already in bed? And I'm like, that sounds like judgment. Listen, I'm like 35 going on 85. Like, yes, like during the week, I'm pretty much like a routine
Mhm.
person. Like it keeps me like very in a good
Mhm.
space. And I laughed. I heard a friend tell me recently, he's like, I think this is like the happiest all of us have seen you.
Mhm.
And I really can't complain about
Mhm.
much. And that doesn't mean I don't have rough moments,
Sure.
but I also work my ass off to keep me this
Mhm.
way.
I know for myself, sometimes when I fall off of that routine, I kind of beat myself up. How do you keep yourself from beating yourself down when things don't go as the way you want them to go?
That's the perfect. So this week, that was the perfect example. It wasn't necessarily the routine fell apart, but like I felt like I backslid a little bit into some like it was Black Friday this weekend, obviously, and I went a little overboard on
Mhm.
shopping, admittedly, and it derailed some of my stuff, and I totally went into the I'm not enough
Mhm.
spiral because I've been doing super great for the last year,
Mhm.
and I'm like, what happened? And it was because holidays are coming up and guilt and feeling shitty, and I was like, I don't understand what I just did, but it was that I'm getting ready to do a cross country move here early in this spring. I'm going to be moving to North Carolina. And so I have stress, and then family and holidays, and everybody wants to spend time with
Mhm.
me. And I have set a very hard boundary of one activity a weekend.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm not doing anything more than that because I'm prepping everything to move and sell and all
Mhm.
this stuff. And so I have like really been trying to like do all the right things to
Mhm.
keep myself in check. And I was feeling that stress. And so, to cope with the stress, I was like, add to cart, add to cart,
Mhm.
add to cart. And then Saturday, I went live shopping, and
Mhm.
I'm like, add to cart,
Mhm.
add to cart. And then afterwards, I felt the immense guilt of, why did I do that?
Mhm.
Why did I buy all those things? I did not need them. And oh, and then I felt guilt, 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 guilt. And then I'm not enough. And why did I
Mhm.
spend all those things? And I was like, oh, I backslid.
Mhm.
And because that's an old coping skill for
Sure.
me, 100%.
Mhm.
Because that instant gratification of new shiny things is
Yep.
like chasing the
Yep.
high. And
It's no
I
different
went to,
than someone just having another beer and having another one, right? And getting that drink or whatever their vice is. It's that
it
same
is a
thing.
totally.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking in my head, like, whoa, man, that hasn't happened in so long. But I'll tell you, I stood up and went, I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay. It wasn't that bad. I can, it's just things
Mm-hmm.
and just money, and that can be rebuilt. And it could have been worse, first of all. But also, then I'm going to start back. It was Monday. I was like, start back and we're going to just reground process. And then I reached out to support
Mm-hmm.
and I grounded and I went to groups. And then I'm going to be going to a group again on Saturday. So it's like, I had therapy yesterday. So I like made sure that I was like supporting myself. So, I mean, recovery is an everyday
Yeah,
process. And so it's hard
sure,
sometimes.
sure. And you have to choose your hard, right?
Yep. And I don't, so my point is, I still beat myself up
Yeah,
sometimes. I'm my own worst critic. I think a lot of us
sure.
are. But if I'm going to do that, I'll go back to like affirmations or like I'll talk to
Mm-hmm.
someone who I trust and who can look at me and be like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not true.
It's okay to be knocked down because we all get knocked down, but it's what we do afterwards, right? Do we stay down or do we pick ourselves up and reach out for, put our hand up and say, hey, can you walk with me? Right.
Yep, and that's exactly it. And the phone's 10,000
Mm.
pounds a lot of the time. I know we say that. Um, I had to learn that
Mm.
it's not really that
Yeah.
heavy. And so I have those trusted people where I'm like, hey, I need help.
And there are people that will be grateful that you reached out to them. Right. I know when people reach out to me, say, hey, I'm going through this, it makes me feel better that they reached out to me. And even though it could be shitty for them, it's okay. And I can say what I need to say to help them along the way. And it helps me feel better because when I help someone, it does something in me to help someone. So, when someone reaches out, it's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. And to play off what you said, service, that to me is the service factor. And that for me has been a big part of my recovery too, which is a big
Hmm.
reason why I do what I do for work now and where I was working before was paying it forward
Hmm.
has helped me hugely.
Yeah. What would you say to someone who is where you are? They're sitting at the console and they're struggling. What would you say to them?
Depending on at what level they're struggling at, is reach out, or whether it's to me or a friend or like someone. There's so many of us out there in our community in 911 or even to you that are willing to help and have many, many resources available. And I think that's where it was hard for me and took me so long to reach out. And first responders, often the thing we say is we reach out 5 years too
Mhm.
late. I wish that I would have reached out 5 years before I did.
Mhm.
And many of us that did get to the breaking point, is that you don't have to get to the breaking
Mhm.
point to reach out. Like, don't let it get that bad.
Mhm.
I don't want to say that was my regret, but I could have prevented that.
Mhm.
And so if you're struggling or thinking about it or want any kind of help, just reach out.
Mhm.
There's help of all kinds for you, for therapy, retreats, uh, treatment, support groups. There's all kinds of things out there. And also stay curious about your
Mhm.
feelings, because that's the other thing that I love now is that when I have anything pop up, instead of pushing it down, I chase the curiosity. That's been kind of my catchphrase lately, whether it's about training or it's about feelings or anything, is I'm like, chase that curiosity, because
Mhm.
you don't know where it's going to go. And instead of pushing it away and saying, no, now's not the right time, follow it.
As we wrap this up, think about, I mean, besides picking up the phone or reaching out to someone and asking someone for help, what's one thing someone can do today, right now, that will kind of help them move to a better place? One practice, one thing?
So the things that I have been really pushing for people to do is find what fills their
Mm.
cup. So self-care wise, whether one of the things that I always laugh about in training, right? Whether you sit in a session in a conference or you go to a training class or you watch a video or read an article, we used to always be taught back in the old days is eat, sleep, and exercise.
Mm.
Sleep 8 hours, eat a healthy meal, and exercise 30 minutes a day or an hour or whatever. And in law enforcement and fire and dispatch, it's not realistic that most of the people sleep 8 hours a
Right.
day. And I mean, I do now. And I laughed because I was at a conference in Montana, and one of my cohorts from North Carolina actually asked them if anyone in there sleeps 8 hours. And I raised my hand, and she's like, put your hand down. she's like, you don't really sleep 8 hours, do you? And I'm like, yeah, I do. But I'm also in the private sector now. It's much different. And I never did that until I got out of 911. And I honestly can say I sleep 8 hours a night now. And it's beautiful. But that was never the case in 911. And so my thing is, I know that it's not realistic for people to have wellness like that. Not 8 hours a night in 911, not 8 hours a night as a firefighter, not 8 hours a night as a cop, but try to get the quality that you can when you're getting it. But with that, I say the other part to balance out is the other self-care tools that you're doing. Recharge yourself the best you can with what you're doing. And what fills my cup is not going to be the same that fills your cup or fills Ryan's cup or anybody else. And like Ryan likes to run and exercise and do things, and that's what refills his cup. And speaking at conferences and stuff, I can say that I don't exercise as refilling my cup. My refill cup is, meditating and bath and recharging alone and watching my favorite shows or reading a book, like very introvert type refilling. Whereas like Tracy Eldridge, her refill cup is being around her people and being out and extrovert type things. And so we've all kind of talked about that and used those as examples. Like everyone's refill, it looks very different. And so find what your self-care refill is. And there's actually like tests out there, just like personality tests you can do for like self-care, like kind of like your love language. Everyone's love language is different. There's a self-care love language that you can find that works for you and figure out what that is. Because people would come up to me and be like, great, you talk about self-care all the time in these sessions, but like, one, how do I fit it in? And two, that self-care doesn't work for me. And I'm like, then that's not the right self-care for you. Your self-care might not be being out in nature like it is for me. Some people hate nature. My self-care is definitely not being out in the city.
Right.
Like I could not think of anything else that makes me more insane than walking through New York City. I think it's nice to go once in a while and see Broadway, but there's nothing more stressful for me than being out amongst the city like I make my team drive me around anytime we go places where there's one-way streets in city. I'm like, oh, people.
Like that little,
So find what fills
was
your
it a
cup.
TikTok thing? The little kid goes, "Uh-oh, people." Remember
Yeah,
that one?
that's me. I'm like, and that's why I'm like, I love going to Disneyland, but man, I will go on a day when there's not anyone there. It drives me insane. Because like that happened when I went recently. I told my parents, you guys go on a couple rides. I'm going to sit here where there's no people for 45 minutes and just like stay for a second because I need to reground and recenter. Like I'm very good at being like, no, I need a minute.
Yeah. One thing
You have to find what fills your cup.
for me, this past summer, it was riding a bicycle across the country. That was amazing. And I highly recommend anyone that if you want to experience, see the country slow, that's a great way to do it. And for me, it taught me so much about myself. It taught me, I was talking to a friend earlier today, and we were talking about being present and being aware of our surroundings. And that bike ride really taught me to be present, because I had to be aware of what's in front of me, and I had to be aware of what's coming behind me, in order to live, in order to survive a bike ride. And there was places that we had to be aware of what was in the woods because there was bears. We didn't see any, but we were told. So it taught me to be present. It taught me to be aware and to be here right now, not worry about the future, not no regret about the past, but being here, being now. And the daily thing that I like to do is every day. And this morning I bombed at it, but I like to, when I wake up, the first thing I always do is check the weather on my phone, because I want to know what the temperature is, or it's raining. And then I do a small devotional. I'm a person of faith, so I do a small devotional and just absorb that into my mind. But then in the evening at night, I always make a big effort to not look at my phone within 30 minutes of going to bed.
That's great sleep
So
hygiene.
I read about this, and I read how the blue light from phones wakes up your brain and keeps you from sleeping. So I've made it a practice to not look at my phone before I go to bed, 30 minutes before I go to bed.
And has it improved your
It,
sleep?
you know, I've always been able to fall asleep, like, and my wife gets so irritated with me because I lay down and I'm asleep within seconds.
That's like my dad. My mom and I always look at him, we're like, that must be
Yeah.
nice.
And she sits there, like last night, she said she was awake for 2 hours after we turned the lights out, and I'm already
I'm
sleeping.
like, you don't think about your life problems and all your regrets and the world problems before you sleep. So nice
Yeah.
for you.
But then I woke up at midnight or a little bit after, and then I couldn't sleep for 2 hours. So, it's but that practice of just putting the phone away and not looking at it. And then I read, I read for, and I don't do this as much as I used to, but I used to read books, and I would read until like the words didn't make sense anymore. And then I put the book away, turn the lights out, and boom, I was gone.
My best friend Hillary does that. She reads before bed, and then she's like, when I start not realizing what I'm reading or I forget the page,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. But
put
you
the
have
book
to read
away.
something like kind of boring to do that. If you read like a,
That's what my problem is. The books I read are those like thrillers
yeah,
or
you want to find
psychological.
out
So
what's
I'm like,
next
then
in your page
I
turner.
don't want to put it
Right.
down.
Yeah. You got to get some boring books. But that has helped me as well. Just to it just kind of lowers my heart rate and just gets me down to a place where I can relax and be able to sleep. And so, you know, those are some things that I do. Maybe it'll work for someone who's watching or listening to this. You give it a try. You never know until you try. But the thing is, you can't just try it once and it didn't work. You got to be consistent at it and
No,
grow
it's
at
a
it. It's a pattern,
pattern.
right?
Practice. Same thing with meditation. That's what I tell people. I'm like, it's just like working out at the gym, right? You start with a 5 pound
Yep.
dumbbell and then you move up. Like, if you can't just do it once and then it's like, oh, that
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah,
Like,
you can't bench press 200 pounds the first day.
no.
You got to build up to it. So, well, this has been a great conversation, Cassie. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being vulnerable that way and for the work that you're doing. And I want to just congratulate you on that and just keep on doing it, keep on working, and keep on sharing and helping others. I really appreciate that. And I wish you the best for your move coming up.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cassie, for spending time with me today on the podcast. And thanks to all of you who have taken time to listen, to watch, and especially those of you who have left a review. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't left a review, what you waiting on? Please do so. I want to be sure I'm bringing content to you that you want to hear, and your reviews help. And remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Be sure to tune in next week for another interview with an amazing first responder leader. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.